It's a strange thing, isn't it? How your worth often becomes most visible only after you've walked away. She thought your presence was permanent, something she could count on without ever having to earn it. You were always there, a steady force in the background, like the sun rising every morning. But one day, without warning, you stopped, not out of spite, not to teach a lesson, but because you finally understood your value was being overlooked. You didn't scream. You didn't plead for her to notice you. You didn't send long texts explaining your feelings or defending your intentions. You simply disappeared. With rage, but with resolve, calm, quiet, centered, and now, the ordinary has become extraordinary. The background presence she barely acknowledged now haunts the edges of her everyday. That's the ripple effect of a grounded man choosing peace over performance. That's the power of walking away, not to manipulate, but to realign. This video dives deep into that quiet transformation. We'll explore why disappearing isn't an act of revenge, but one of self-respect. We'll unpack how your absence creates space for her reflection, for your growth, and for the truth to rise without noise.
Oh.
Because sometimes the boldest move a man can make isn't raising his voice. It's choosing to go where his presence is truly valued. So ask yourself, what speaks louder? 1,000 explanations, or the sound of silence from a man who finally chose himself? Stay with me. Because once you understand the quiet strength of walking away, you'll never look back the same way again. When a grounded man removes his presence, it's not an act of revenge. It's a reflection of inner strength. She didn't expect it. She assumed you'd always be there, just one message away, one call from showing up again. But then, without warning or drama, you were gone. Not with shouting, not with blame, but with clarity. And suddenly, what she once overlooked becomes the very thing she longs for. You didn't create noise, you created contrast. The difference between having something stable and watching it vanish in silence is startling. Now, the peace you carried, the steadiness of your energy, the reliability she never thanked you for, those qualities have turned into haunting reminders. She leans into memories now, not because you made a scene, but because your absence made her confront what she never truly valued. Marcus Aurelius once said, "If someone can prove me wrong, I will change, for I seek the truth." But what happens when words fail, when someone refuses to see the truth staring at them in plain sight? You don't argue, you step back. And that retreat becomes a lesson stronger than any explanation ever could. She thought you were replaceable. She believed she could find another voice to say goodnight, another listener to nod in care, another man to absorb her silence without judgment. But what she failed to see was that what you offered wasn't mere attention, it was structure. It was emotional grounding. And now that it's gone, the space left behind echoes with everything she thought she didn't need. What happens next is what no one warns her about. The confusion becomes reflection. The silence becomes a mirror. She scrolls through old messages, searching for clues. She wonders why you haven't reached out, why the notifications are quiet, and most of all, why it bothers her so deeply. That's the effect of a man rooted in purpose, walking away without apology. When a stoic man removes himself, he doesn't leave destruction behind, he leaves stillness. And that stillness speaks volumes. It reveals how much space he held, how deeply he was woven into the emotional fabric of her life. And perhaps most painfully, how much she took that for granted. That's not manipulation. It's not cruelty. That's discipline. That's clarity. And that is the path of the stoic man. Stay with this idea, because what comes next will show you why your silence may become the loudest thing she's ever heard. When you stopped responding, it wasn't out of pettiness or spite. You simply decided to no longer engage. No dramatic farewell, no last-minute confession of feelings, no carefully crafted message to explain your silence. You just faded with grace, with dignity, and most importantly, with peace. She expected you to fight. She thought you'd try one last time, maybe send a long message, beg for understanding, ask to meet, plead your case. But you didn't. And that right there is what caught her off guard, because she didn't realize that sometimes the loudest action a man can take is taking no action at all, A stoic man doesn't announce his boundaries, he embodies them. He doesn't scream for recognition, he lives in the truth of his own worth. When his value is overlooked, when his presence is treated as routine, he doesn't raise his voice, simply walks away, quietly, clearly, entirely. Your presence was never just about being physically there. It was emotional energy, a steady flow of care, attention, and silent protection. She didn't notice it when it was constant, but she feels its absence now, like a light that used to warm a room suddenly switched off. And that darkness? It doesn't feel empty, it feels full of everything she lost. You weren't trying to make her hurt, you were choosing to honor yourself. She thought if you disappeared, someone else would fill your space. But she didn't just lose texts and good morning messages. She lost the man who brought patience, the one who listened, the one who stood steady while she wavered. That kind of presence cannot be replaced by a few sweet words or shallow attention from someone new. Your silence became a mirror. It reflected back to her all the things she ignored. The stability, the loyalty, the emotional space you held so naturally. She didn't reciprocate. She didn't nurture. And now, with you gone, the absence isn't quiet, it screams. You didn't walk away because you were angry. You left because staying would have meant betraying your own values. You didn't need her to understand. You didn't need closure, because what you found in your silence was something she could never offer: peace. Now she's left with the stillness, the space that used to be filled with your energy, the void you never spoke of, but that says everything. It's not heartbreak. That's realignment. That's self-respect in motion. That's what it means to walk the path of a stoic man. What comes next will reveal how your decision to leave didn't end the story, it began a transformation. She didn't see it coming. When you stepped away, she assumed it was temporary. Maybe you were upset, maybe you needed space. But deep down, she expected you to come back like always. To explain, to try again. But you didn't, and now she's facing a silence that refuses to give her answers. You see, when you gave your all, your loyalty, your effort, your presence, she began to treat it as ordinary, stayed through her cold moods, through her silences, through her doubt. You were her constant. And in time, she mistook your reliability for weakness. Your patience became invisible. Your emotional support became background noise until you removed it. She may think you're playing games now, trying to get a reaction. But this isn't about tactics. This isn't about winning her back. This is about setting a standard. You're no longer willing to explain what should have been appreciated from the beginning. You're no longer watering yourself down for someone who never saw the depth of what you gave. When a man reaches his threshold, not out of anger, but out of clarity, something shifts. You didn't stop caring. You stopped overextending. You didn't walk away with bitterness. You walked away with a calm understanding that you deserved better. This was never about making her miss you. It was about no longer missing yourself. The version of you that tolerated being overlooked, being taken for granted, that man is gone. And what replaced him? A man who now honors his peace more than he craves validation. She thought it was just a phase. You'd reach out just like before, but this time is different, because this isn't silence meant to provoke. This is silence rooted in self-respect. There's nothing louder than the absence of a man who used to show up no matter what. Marcus Aurelius said, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." And you did. You stopped trying to prove your worth. You started protecting your energy. You raised your standards not to hurt her, but to heal yourself. Now she's left in the aftermath, trying to understand how the man who was once always there could disappear without warning. That's what happens when a stoic man finally sees his value. He doesn't make a scene, he makes a decision. And that decision changes everything. Stay with this journey. The path of strength is only just unfolding. She used to think your silence meant you didn't care. That when you went quiet, it was just a passing mood or a sign of detachment. But now that silence surrounds her daily, and it speaks louder than your words ever did. It isn't just the lack of conversation, it's the absence of you. Your attention, your patience, your steady loyalty, all of it, gone. She once brushed off your efforts like they were nothing special. You were dependable, predictable, always there when she needed you. She could vent, disappear, withdraw, and you would stay. Until one day, you didn't, and that's when the quiet became deafening. Now, she replays your last words like lyrics to a song she never appreciated until the music stopped. She scrolls through messages, rereads conversations, trying to find a warning, some final hint that you were finished giving. But the truth is, you didn't leave in rage. You left with calm finality. No accusations, no demands, just stillness. That stillness, it isn't emptiness. It's a powerful boundary. A stoic man doesn't vanish to make a woman miss him. Steps away when he realizes his energy is no longer respected. He stops offering warmth where there is only coldness in return. Your silence wasn't a tactic, it was a choice. Conscious return to your own peace. And now, every time she checks her phone and doesn't see your name, every time she posts and hopes for your reaction, she's reminded you've stopped watching. You've stopped performing. You left the audience. You exited the stage. In doing so, you became unforgettable. That's the irony. She thought your silence was weakness. But it's the purest form of strength. Because stillness, when rooted in clarity, becomes louder than any confrontation ever could. It's the sound of a man choosing himself over chaos. And now, that silence haunts her. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him." Who performed the injury? You didn't retaliate. You didn't stoop to bitterness. You simply became still-inned in that stillness. She finally hears everything she ignored when you were speaking. This isn't about making her hurt. This is about you healing. And when a man truly embraces that kind of silence, it lingers. It teaches. It transforms. Let this moment be a reminder. Your stillness has power. Stay grounded. The next chapter will show why being unavailable was the most valuable move you ever made. She used to roll her eyes when you were too available. Your name lit up her screen. It was just expected. You were always the one to check in, to ask how her day went, to offer comfort without needing to be asked. Your consistency became her normal, but now that silence has replaced your voice, something has shifted. She stares at her phone, waiting, hoping, but nothing comes. Guess the man who once gave endlessly no longer lives here. You weren't just consistent, you were loyal. You remembered the details, the little things she didn't think mattered. You reached out even when she didn't respond. You stayed when she was distant. Your presence was a safety net she thought she'd never lose. But slowly, she began to mistake that devotion for neediness. She thought your warmth was too easy to find. And then you vanished. Not with drama, not with one final emotional outburst. You simply disappeared quietly, like a chapter that ends mid-sentence. Now she's reading those old lines, replaying past conversations, trying to figure out what changed. But the answer isn't in your words, it's in your absence. This isn't a game. This is the stoic response to being taken for granted. A man doesn't need to beg for recognition. He doesn't force others to value him. He simply withdraws and lets silence deliver the message. You didn't stop caring. You stopped chasing. Peace isn't found in proving your worth, it's found in honoring it. She thought your presence was permanent because you made it feel that way. But permanence is an illusion when appreciation is missing. And now, as the silence stretches, she's learning a painful truth. Just because a man gives endlessly doesn't mean he'll give forever. There comes a time when a man outgrows the role of the fallback, the comfort zone, the emotional crutch. And when that moment arrives, he doesn't shout or plead. He stops responding, becomes distant not to punish, but to protect. And in doing so, he becomes what she never thought he could be, replaceable. You didn't do this to break her. You did this to rebuild yourself. So let her scroll. Let her wonder. Let her feel the absence of the man she once believed would always be there. You're not being cold. You're being clear. And in that clarity, you've reclaimed the power that was always yours. What happens next will reveal what she does when the emotional safety net disappears. For good. At first, she was fine. She even felt relieved. Your absence was quiet, uneventful, like a leaf falling from a tree. No conflict, no pleading, no messy goodbye. Just stillness. She assumed you'd be back, that this was just a phase. At that, phase turned into a pattern. And now it's not silence. She's sitting with its emptiness. Went from indifferent to curious, then from curious to confused. And now she's chasing a ghost. A man who no longer plays the game. Man who doesn't reply to breadcrumbs, who doesn't show up for attention, crumbs tossed his way. You used to answer every call, respond to every need, give energy, even when she gave none. But something inside you changed, Dan. She can feel it. You didn't stop caring. You stopped proving. You stopped explaining your worth to someone who refused to see it. She thought you were easy to replace because you were always available, always ready to fix things, always the first to apologize, to check in, to make peace. Even when she was the one who sparked the storm, you were the calm, trying to patch it all back together. But now, you've stepped out of the cycle. And that? Void. It's no longer a strategy, it's the natural result of your growth, because clarity does something powerful to a man. It quiets the noise. It strengthens the soul. Teaches him that attention doesn't equal affection, and validation is not something he has to chase. And that's where you are now, not colder, not distant, just clearer. She can't quite figure it out. The man who used to respond instantly is nowhere to be found, and in his place, silence. Not bitter silence, focused silence. You've become the unfinished story that lingers. The man who used to be an open book is now a locked chapter she can't access. And that mystery, it drives her mad. She replays conversations like riddles, wonders what she missed. She sees your kindness, your patience, your support, and realizes she mistook all of that for weakness. But now, there's no door to knock on, no safety net to fall into, just stillness. And that stillness echoes louder than any reaction ever. Could this is the essence of the Stoic path? You didn't disappear to make her suffer. You walked away to protect your peace. You stopped engaging, not out of punishment, but because you finally understood a man who masters himself cannot be controlled by anyone else. And now she feels it. Every single day. You didn't beg. You didn't break. You didn't chase someone who couldn't see your worth. And that trait, there's what made you powerful. While she thought you'd be circling around, waiting for another chance, you were already walking. In a new direction, toward yourself, toward clarity. You didn't just walk away from her. You walked toward something deeper, self-respect. You stopped showing up for someone who had come to expect your presence like clockwork. She thought your energy was endless, like a faucet she could turn on and off whenever she pleased. But you turned it off not to make her suffer, but because you finally realized she wasn't listening. You were done talking to someone who was never really hearing you. She thought you'd be like the others, always chasing, always trying, always hoping. But instead, you vanished. Not to create mystery, but because you no longer needed to be validated. You didn't slam the door. You simply stopped knocking. That's the beauty of emotional discipline. It's rare. It's magnetic. Where everyone is yelling to be seen, the man who stands quietly in his power becomes unforgettable. You weren't suppressing your emotions. You were mastering them. You were done clinging. You were done explaining. You were done being misunderstood by someone who never truly tried to understand you in the first place. She expected a reaction, a confession, a moment of vulnerability. But what she got was stillness. Not a cold shoulder, but a clear one. Not rage, but distance. That's when it started to hit her. Maybe you weren't just a phase. Maybe you weren't just another guy. Maybe you were the one who got away without making a scene. You used to be her morning message, her silent comfort, her unspoken reassurance. But now there's only silence where you once stood. And it's that contrast, the shift from certainty to absence, that speaks volumes. It forces her to reflect, to question, to feel. Didn't disappear to be cruel. You did it because staying was costing you your peace. And when peace is threatened, a stoic man doesn't fight for attention. He walks away from chaos. She went from being chased to being left with herself. And in that silence, your value has never been louder. This is what happens when a man stops performing and starts protecting his energy. when he stops reacting and starts reclaiming his power. You didn't need applause, you needed space. And now she's left to realize. Man she thought was replaceable became the man she can't forget. She assumed your silence meant defeat, that you were hurting, waiting by your phone, secretly hoping she'd reach out. But she was wrong. You weren't waiting. You were rebuilding, quietly, intentionally, not from bitterness, but from clarity. While she was out trying to prove she'd moved on, crafting the perfect image for others to see, you were proving something much more powerful to yourself. That you never needed her validation to begin with, that your value wasn't tied to her recognition. You were choosing yourself, not loudly, not for attention, but in silence, step by step. Each day, you put the pieces of yourself back together, not the version that once tolerated being overlooked, but the version that demands respect without saying a word. You weren't sulking in pain. You were strategizing your growth. You weren't lost. You were found in your discipline, your vision, your renewed standards. That's what Stoicism teaches, to turn inward when the world misunderstands you, to rise in stillness, to build without needing to announce the blueprint. You didn't post about your transformation. You didn't try to make her notice. Your evolution was never about hurt, it was about you. She doesn't see the early mornings, the cold workouts, focused journaling, the mental rewiring. She doesn't see the late-night reflections or the quiet hours spent sharpening your mind and rebuilding your confidence. All she sees now is the silence, and that silence terrifies her because it no longer feels like absence. It feels like elevation. She scrolls. She wonders. She replays your old words, trying to figure out when it all changed. But the truth is, the change wasn't sudden. It was slow, steady, rooted in a decision to no longer be the man who chases validation or needs closure. Need to block her. You didn't need to announce anything. You simply became unavailable to the old cycle. That's not revenge. It's transformation. That's self-respect in action. Waste no more time arguing. What a good man should be. Be one. And you did just that. You became the man who no longer explains his silence, because that silence now speaks louder than any apology ever could. She thought she could replace you, but you weren't rebuilding for her. You were redeeming yourself. And now, she doesn't just miss you, she realizes she can't reach you. Not because you vanished, but because you've outgrown the version of yourself she once knew. She thought she could replace you easily, that someone else could take your place, offer what you gave, do what you did. But now, you're not just a memory. You're a presence she can't shake. It's not because you tried to be unforgettable. It's because you were real, consistent, deeply rooted in who you are, and that kind of energy cannot be copied. Real presence doesn't beg for attention, doesn't scream to be seen. It simply is. When you were around, you didn't try to impress. You didn't compete. You didn't perform. You just showed up fully, offered value freely, and loved. Without asking for applause, that quiet strength stayed in the background until it was gone. While she casually believed she could move on, distract herself, and replace you with someone new, something unexpected happened. Your absence began to do what your presence never could. It forced her to feel, not because you pulled a stunt, because you did nothing. No angry texts, no dramatic exit, just stillness. And that stillness started to echo through her life, like a room missing its foundation. In a world hungry for instant validation and reaction, your restraint became a form of rebellion. You didn't chase closure, you didn't argue to be seen, didn't lower your standards to fit into a story where you were treated as optional. That wasn't ego, that was wisdom, Stoic wisdom. Marcus Aurelius said, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." And that's exactly what you became, like anything she expected. You didn't retaliate, you elevated. You became a man who doesn't need to prove anything, because his presence speaks for itself, even when he's not in the room, she remembers. Now, the time, the attention, the steadiness, all the things you gave freely, without demand. But when something is always available, it becomes invisible, till it's gone. Now she's scrolling back, seeing you in a different light, at a light of hindsight, And she finally realizes what she thought was replaceable was actually rare. What she assumed was average was quietly exceptional. You didn't change to impress her. You evolved to honor yourself. You became the man who doesn't ask to be remembered because your absence makes forgetting impossible. That's the power of Stoic transformation. And you're just getting started. She never thought you'd actually leave. Not for real. Not without warning. Definitely not without one last attempt to fix things. But that's exactly what you did. No messages. No late-night calls. No dramatic declarations. Just silence. And now, she's living in the echo of your absence. She scrolls through old conversations, searching for clues. What did she miss? When did your energy shift? But the truth is, there was no grand moment. There was only the slow realization that continuing to give yourself to someone who never saw your value was no longer strength, it was self-neglect. And so, you stopped. Quietly. Completely. This wasn't about making her feel guilty. It wasn't about trying to teach her a lesson. It was about you finally learning your own, that your peace is priceless, and your energy deserves to be guarded like gold. You didn't block her, you didn't lash out. You just became unreachable, not through avoidance, but through evolution. And the irony? She didn't believe it at first. She assumed you'd come back like before, that you were just taking space. But time passed. The silence grew. And the man she once knew, the one who always replied, who always forgave, who always showed up, he wasn't returning. You rebuilt yourself in that silence. You didn't wait for closure. You became it. No, you didn't need her to understand you. Needed to understand yourself, so you dove inward. You crafted a new version of yourself from the pieces she overlooked. And the result? A man who no longer fits into the small space she once gave him. She didn't expect that. She didn't expect the man she thought she could live without to become the man no one else could compare to. She lost access. And now, all she has is the memory of who you were while you live fully in who you've become. This isn't just healing. It's mastery. Stoic power in motion. You didn't disappear to break her heart. You disappeared to reclaim your soul. And in doing so, you became untouchable not because you're hiding, but because you've outgrown the version of yourself that tolerated being misunderstood. This is your new chapter. You didn't leave her behind. You left the man who needed her to see him. And now you see yourself more clearly than ever. And that is everything. She thought your silence was just another tactic, that you were pulling away for effect. Any day now, you'd reach out again with one last emotional plea. But the days kept passing. You didn't return, because this wasn't a strategy. It was a shift. A quiet, irreversible shift in how you viewed yourself and how you chose to respond to being undervalued. You didn't vanish to play mind games. You disappeared because you stopped trying to be understood by someone who was never truly listening. You stopped needing her to get it. Stopped pouring energy into explanations that always fell on deaf ears. Instead, you turned that energy inward. You turned it into peace, discipline, and self-respect. And now she's left to wrestle with a truth she never anticipated. You're not coming back. Not because you don't care, but because you finally care enough about yourself to stay gone. That kind of stillness is deafening. She can hear it in every scroll, in every moment of silence, in the absence of your name lighting up her phone. She thought she could forget you, replace you, rewrite the narrative. But what she can't rewrite is the impact your presence had and the even greater impact your absence now holds, because your silence is no longer a pause. It's a boundary. A line she didn't expect you to draw and one you're no longer willing to erase. You were never being dramatic. You were being decisive. You chose clarity over confusion. You chose self-worth over being tolerated. And that choice, it changed everything. Now she remembers your patience, your kindness, your loyalty, the very things she once rolled her eyes at. She replays them. Like a playlist she once skipped, not realizing those songs would become the soundtrack to everything she lost. You're not bitter. You're better. You're not hiding. You're healing. You're not lost. You've leveled up. She didn't lose a man who chased. She lost a man who grew, who evolved, who walked away not to make her miss him, but because he stopped missing himself. And now, in your stillness, you've become something she'd never imagined you'd be: unreachable, unshakable, unforgettable. That's what happens when a man outgrows the need to be seen and instead chooses to stand fully in his power. Stay grounded, because this new version of you. He doesn't just survive, he leads. She thought your silence was temporary, that eventually you'd reach back out. Maybe with an apology, maybe with a memory, maybe with a just checking in, but none of that came. Days turned into weeks, and still nothing. What she didn't understand was that your silence wasn't a delay. It was a decision. You weren't trying to win. You weren't trying to punish. You were done. It's fully, peacefully, intentionally done with giving energy to someone who didn't respect it. That silence, it wasn't passive. It was powerful. Was the final chapter she never thought you'd write? While she was watching, waiting, posting, reacting, you were moving quietly. You didn't need to show the world you were over it. You needed to show yourself who you could become without the weight of that story. You hit the gym not to prove a point, but to reclaim discipline. You read not to distract yourself, but to expand your mind. You healed not to attract her attention, but to regain your direction, because this was never about her. It was always about you. About remembering the man you were before you shrunk to fit inside a relationship built on conditions. About honoring the version of yourself that stopped being available to people who only called when it was convenient. Now you're not just you're unreachable, not blocked, not hidden, just evolved. You didn't close the door. You built a new house in a new city with new standards, and she doesn't have the address anymore. And the irony? She didn't realize how much space you took up until you no longer filled it. She thought she could forget you the moment someone else showed up. But all those late-night scrolls, all those half-hearted dates, they only make your absence louder, because you weren't just another man. You were the man who stayed when she pushed, who forgave when she pulled away, who gave when nothing was returned. And now that man is gone, and in his place is someone who doesn't need to prove anything anymore. This is stoic mastery in motion. You didn't retreat to disappear. You stepped back to rise. And in that rise, you became the version of yourself that doesn't chase closure, because he's already closed that chapter with grace. Feel the absence. Let her wonder. Because what you're building now doesn't need her validation. It only needs your focus. You didn't need to announce your departure. You didn't need to slam the door or raise your voice. All you had to do was stop showing up, and that changed everything. At first, she didn't understand the weight of your absence, she thought. You were just giving her space, that eventually you'd come back like always. But days passed, then weeks. Still no text, no call, no reaction. And suddenly that silence wasn't just confusing, it was undeniable. You weren't trying to make a statement. You were simply choosing your peace over her chaos. You'd spent so long being available, predictable, emotionally present. She had grown used to your warmth, your check-ins, your loyalty. But like all things taken for granted, it faded into the background of her life until it was gone. She thought stillness meant indifference, but now she knows better. Stillness, when rooted in clarity, is power. You weren't ignoring her. You were elevating yourself. Your presence used to be a comfort zone she never acknowledged. You were her steady hand, her listening ear, her emotional constant. But she mistook your kindness for weakness, your availability for neediness. And now that you've pulled away, she realizes just how much space you held in her world. Every scroll through her phone is a search for your name. Every time she posts, a quiet hope that maybe you'll notice. But you don't. You've stopped watching. You've stopped performing. You've stepped off the stage. And in doing so, you've become unforgettable. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." In your case, the best response was silence. Not cooled, not cruel, but centered. You didn't react. You realigned. She hears it now, every moment. You're not there echoes louder than the ones when you were, because this time, your stillness isn't passive, it's resolved. And the most painful part? She knows you're not coming back. Not because you don't care, but because you finally do. You care enough about yourself to stay gone. A kind of departure lingers. It teaches. It reshapes the story she told herself about you. You're not the man who disappeared. You're the man who evolved beyond needing to explain why. And that, more than anything, is what makes you unforgettable. She didn't think the silence would last. She expected it to pass like a storm, loud, chaotic, but temporary. But it didn't pass. It stayed. And the longer it lingered, the more it echoed. Because this wasn't just the absence of your voice. It was the absence of your presence, your steady attention, your quiet loyalty, the things she once overlooked, now haunting her in every silent scroll and every unanswered notification. She used to treat your effort like background noise. You were always there, predictable, reliable, the one who responded even when she didn't, the one who forgave even she didn't apologize. Where along the way, she stopped seeing it. She stopped valuing the man who stayed even when she gave him every reason to leave. But now all she hears is the echo of stillness. Your last words play in her mind like the final line of a book she never finished. She scrolls through old messages looking for some kind of signal, some final warning that you were done giving, but there was no grand exit, no performance. Just a man who quietly stopped showing up because he finally realized he didn't have to. And that stillness? It wasn't passive. It was powerful. It wasn't cold. It was clear. A stoic man doesn't vanish to create mystery. He walks away because he no longer invests where he's undervalued. That's not drama. It's discipline. Every time she checks her phone and doesn't see your name, every time she posts and wonders if you'll respond, she's reminded, you're no longer watching. You've stepped out of the role she cast you in. You've left the stage. Stopped performing. And now she realizes what she never thought possible. You were never replaceable. Stillness isn't weakness. It's emotional clarity. It's the ability to hold your ground without shouting. It's choosing not to engage in what drains you, and instead protecting what fulfills you. Marcus Aurelius said, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." And your version of that wasn't rage. It was restraint. It's not silence out of spite, but out of strength. She thought your silence meant nothing. Now, it's the loudest thing in her life, and the hardest part. She knows deep down. You're not coming back. Not because you hate her, but because you finally love yourself enough to stay gone. Let that silence speak for you. Let it echo. She never expected your silence to become permanent. She thought it was a phase, a moment of distance, a temporary retreat before you returned to your usual self. But you didn't come back. Not because you wanted to hurt her, but because you finally decided to protect yourself. You stopped explaining, stopped checking in, stopped offering your presence like clockwork. She thought it was a strategy, a trick to win back power in the dynamic. But it wasn't a tactic kit. It was a transformation. You no longer needed her to see your worth. You finally saw it for yourself. She may have assumed you were just playing hard to get. Is that your silence? Was a pause before the pursuit resumed. But this time, there was no return, no reaction.
Oh.
No more rehearsing the same emotional cycles. You didn't disappear to be mysterious. You detached to be free. You stopped giving what was no longer appreciated. You stopped showing up where you were invisible. But in doing so, you showed her something she never thought she'd experience. The loss of a man who gave everything without needing to be asked. A man who, once gone, could not be replaced. You didn't walk away in anger. You walked away in clarity. You didn't slam the door. You simply stopped standing in a place where your presence was taken for granted. You didn't chase closure. You created peace. And now, your silence isn't an empty space. It's a boundary. It's a mirror. It's a reminder that you no longer explain your worth, you live it. Marcus Aurelius said, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." And your thoughts. They are now grounded in value, in self-respect, in discipline. You've evolved beyond the need to be understood. You no longer try to fix what someone else broke in themselves. You no longer wait for validation to feel whole. She scrolls through old memories now, looking for signs of the man she thought she knew. But you're not that man anymore. You've become the version of yourself that doesn't reach back when someone only notices your value in hindsight. You didn't vanish to make her regret. You rose to make yourself proud. And now, in your stillness, in your absence, you've become something she never believed possible and touchable, unforgettable, and entirely out of reach. Let her feel the void. Let your silence echo. Because this time, it's not coming from pain, it's coming from power.